Hi, everybody. I'm Hillary Raimo. Welcome to a very special 2-hour show. Sometimes you just have to do something about what you see going on in the world. You can no longer sit and just watch it happen. You have to decide the best way to offer support and lend your energy into a cause. That is exactly what has inspired me to bring you this special 2-hour broadcast on the Gulf oil leak situation. Many people around the world are feeling helpless. Some remain hopeful, some indifferent, and many are very angry. There has been a mixture of emotions leaking into the minds of those following and affected by this ongoing event. What has happened has not been a natural disaster. Some say it's a conspiracy that breaches our highest leadership, not only of this country, but others as well. Some suggest this is the end of times, prophecies being fulfilled. Others say getting mad or angry is the wrong thing to do, that we should only focus our prayers and love on the situation. What is the right thing to do? So many people struggle with the news feeds, the media blackouts, and constant barrage of information and disinformation that we are seeing on a daily basis. Some turn their heads and refuse to acknowledge, going about their day as usual, and bury their heads in the sand. Conspiracy theories, media blackouts, apocalyptic destruction, wipeout of the human race, is it illusion or fact? There are so many theories circulating the world right now. Where is the hope? What do we do? How bad is this? Our intuition does not match up to the official stories we are being told. People are conflicted by what they feel and see and what their leaders are telling them. Joining me these next 2 hours are an array of experts on a variety of different perspectives, all lending their time and knowledge to us here on the Hillary Raimo Show, right here on AchieveRadio.com. My first guest joining me is Dr. Rikki Ott. She's a community activist, a former commercial salmon fisherman, and has a degree in marine toxicology with a specialty in oil pollution. She experienced firsthand the devastating effects of the Exxon Valdez oil spill and chose to do something about it. She is the author of Sound Truth and Corporate Myth, The Legacy of the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill, and Not One Drop, Promises, Betrayal, and Courage in the Wake of the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill. She is also the founder of 3 nonprofit organizations that deal with lingering harm from man-made environmental disasters. Dr. Ott will be informing us of firsthand observation of a possible cover-up by BP. Her recent appearance on a variety of news programs have sparked controversy and interest in underlying agendas in the Gulf. Welcome, Dr. Ott. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
What is the reality of this situation that we're facing in the Gulf?
Just like Exxon Valdez, there's 2 versions of reality, and one version is controlled by BP, and it's what the public comes to see on the media, television, radio interviews, largely. And unfortunately, it also tends to be the official story.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat. I'm sorry, Dr. Ott, can you repeat that? You broke up on my end. I couldn't hear you, and I don't know if our listeners were able to either.
Oh, maybe I should go outside where there's better reception. Let me try that. There's 2 versions of reality pretty quickly. One is what the people see, what's going on in their communities, and this is not the same as what the official version is. So what I'm going to talk about is the official version, the people's version. Here we go. Let's try this. BP, I think it's pretty well known that right from the start, BP was underestimating the amount of oil that spilled. This happened also in Exxon Valdez, and this is basically what this is about: controlling the images and controlling the story of damages, of how much damage there is. The less damage that people know about, the less liability there'll be outstanding for this giant transnational oil company to have to deal with. We also know that, of course, BP, and actually Exxon did the same thing, but not quite as much, pushed the media up into the air, 3,000 feet, pushed the media off the beaches when the oil started coming in, and is taking an incredibly aggressive attitude with the public. I mean, these are our beaches. This is our ocean. People who are walking the beaches and they find dead wildlife, birds, dolphins, turtles, BP workers come swooping in, or BP themselves, BP representatives, talking about, we'll have you arrested if you touch that carcass. And people are getting very confused. They're saying, well, we don't, who owns this? I mean, how can BP have us arrested? So I'm actually working with different lawyers to find out in the different states what are people's rights on their own beaches. But in Alaska, this was handled a lot differently. NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, was responsible for collecting carcasses because this wildlife is owned by us, the people, and it was collected. It was put as evidence of loss. It was collected into freezer vans that were kept under lock and key, and those freezer vans were maintained until October of 1991 when there was a settlement for natural resource damages under the Clean Water Act, and then the carcasses were burned. And I don't see any of that going on down here in terms of amassing evidence for court. I kind of am seeing the opposite.
So in your opinion, is there a cover-up happening? Are they actively trying to keep us from knowing the truth of what's happening?
I actually have evidence to suggest that is going on. I've got actually images of a dumpster incident fairly recently where carcasses were being dumped into a dumpster, and that's kind of being investigated right now separately. So we're kind of waiting on that story to get it further along. But, I mean, carcasses are not supposed to be ending up in dumpsters.
Yeah. You had said in another interview, Dr. Ott, that people were actually going to the beaches at night and removing carcasses before.
Yes.
Those could get carcasses then.
Oh, sorry. You broke up.
Is that true? I think we lost her. Oh, there you are.
No. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, yeah. This is important, so I want to make sure that we have a good connection. I know you're on a cell phone, and I appreciate you joining us from the airport, I believe you're at. But go ahead, and so what's the truth behind these disappearing carcasses?
I have talked to people in 4 different states now that this personally happened to them, where they were on the beach at night. You know, it's cooler. You go out early in the morning. You go out at night. And people said, oh, my God, you know, there's a dead baby dolphin, was one person in particular here in Alabama. And within 15 minutes, down came this white unmarked van, carcass surrounded, people told, stay away, flashlights out, carcass gone. The turtle monitoring people, this is a program called Share the Beach. It's done by volunteers, and the volunteers are out on the beaches every morning from May 1st into September at 6 o'clock. Each person has a half a mile of beach, and they walk the beach looking for turtle tracks. And there's 4 or so different species of turtles that come ashore now to spawn. The idea is the monitors are out at 6 a.m., they walk a half a mile of beach. If they find any turtle tracks, they follow the tracks up the beach and mark out where the nest is. They flag it, they fence it to give the eggs the biggest chance of, and then they monitor it. And when the baby turtles hatch, they help the turtles to get the maximum number of turtles into the beach, into the ocean. So what the Turtle Watch team did was they made it very clear to BP that they're going to be out at 6 o'clock in the mornings, and they need to have the beaches untouched before 6 o'clock so they can look for tracks. Instead, what they're finding are raked. So basically what that told BP was, get people out there before 6 o'clock in the morning. And so by the time the turtle people come out, the beaches are all raked very nicely. There's no dead anything on the beaches, but there's also no way to see whether there's turtle tracks or not because the beaches are all raked.
And you also said that they're beheading them. They're taking their heads off because they cannot be autopsied without the head attached, correct?
They need the heads. They need to be intact carcasses. And I've had pictures. I have pictures of people down in Mississippi who were on a beach, just happened to be walking their beach when they saw BP paid workers raking up birds. And the birds are a little fragile, and these were oil birds, and the heads were becoming detached from the bodies. And there's no way that those bodies were then going to be saved as evidence. I mean, or autopsied. I mean, these animals, the wildlife, needs to be autopsied to prove the death. Birds, maybe not so much, but definitely turtles, dolphins, whales, because probably one of the primary causes of death is inhalation. This is what happened in Alaska with harbor seals and with sea otters, even though the sea otters also got physically oiled. And these vapors just fry the brain of these animals, and it's a narcotic, and they get dizzy, and they get unconscious, and then they drown. And this is what happened in Alaska, and we need evidence, we need bodies, and we need autopsies to have establish a case.
Yeah. And now, the chemicals that are involved in this cleanup, can you explain what the side effects are on both humans and animals?
Okay. So first of all, oil itself is a hazardous substance declared after it spills. So obviously there's problems with it before it spills too. But we've got hundreds of millions of gallons of oil right now, and this is a Louisiana sweet crude, and there's about 40% of it evaporates into the air or dissolves quickly into the water column. It's got a higher proportion of light ends, what are called light ends. And these volatile organic compounds, benzene, toluene, xylene, naphthalene, and they cause a narcotic effect. So, I mean, literally the most toxic places to be are in the water column as the oil is dissolving, and at the air-water interface where there's this sort of cloud of hydrocarbons that have evaporated into the air. So that's a big problem. If you go look at the material safety data sheets for Louisiana sweet crude, don't do weathered sweet crude, just Louisiana sweet crude. Primary route of exposure is inhalation and skin contact, nausea, dizziness, headaches, sore throats, leading to the unconsciousness, coma, and even death. And the less severe, the headaches, the nausea, the dizziness, the sore throats, that is what people offshore and people onshore are complaining about. So, I think this is a problem. Then on top of the hazardous situation created just by the oil itself, BP's actually managed to make a bad situation worse by adding in dispersants. And these dispersants of choice that it's using have a human health hazard, 2-butoxyethanol. That's just one of the compounds of concern. The proprietary compounds, it turns out, are a lot of inorganic chemicals that are also incredibly toxic. And the dispersants break up the oil into little droplets that then go down into the water column. And the dispersants that are being used are about 53 to 63% effective. So you have roughly a little bit better than half of the oil, say, that's being pushed into a subsurface state of little tiny droplets. And the dispersed oil is more toxic than the undispersed oil, and the dispersants are more toxic than the oil itself. So now we've got coming ashore on these beaches not only the hard asphalt sort of patties or chunks left over from the burn, but also mousse, which is oil and water mixed together and dispersant. The dissolved cloud-like forms, the plumes that are underwater, that are mixed oil and dispersant, surface sheen, and oil in the air. I mean, you could actually, when the wind is blowing right, I've been two different communities now, Venice, Louisiana, and Orange Beach, Alabama, on literally what the residents are starting to call bad air days, where you can actually taste the oil in the back of your throat. And I've had people describe it to me as like, oh, it smells like my daughter's crayons when they melt in the sun. Or somebody told me, oh, it's like if I go spend a weekend at the racetrack and I come back smelling of hydraulic fluid and stuff. And it is. It's crude oil in the air.
Dr. Ott, let me ask you this. Now, what are the probabilities of this getting into the rain cycle where it's actually going to get into the atmosphere and then come down within the different landmass?
Huge. That's what happens. That's how the air clears itself of toxic chemicals, airborne. So it's sort of a false statement to say that the oil, once it gets into the air, it disappears. It doesn't. It goes up, and it will come down as rain. And the residents down here are saying, what about the hurricane season? And it's like, what about the hurricane season? I mean, the hurricane, like with the Prestige oil spill in Spain, it just picked the surface oil and mixed it into the air, and then it came down on people's houses and the sheep and the dogs, and the entire communities in Spain got sick because of this.
Do you think that this is responsible for the strange spotting on vegetation that has been reported in the Mississippi River bottoms, the white spots on different plants?
I don't know about that yet, but I do know that the burning is concentrating the heavy metals that are naturally occurring in oil, and there's a signature that is coming down as rain, and it's up as far as Tennessee, I believe.
It just blows my mind that this is happening, and a lot of people feel so upset about it, and some people are sick of hearing it. What do you think? What is your personal opinion of the political agenda here? Is this a conspiracy?
Well, the oil industry already has one big strike against it, and that is the climate crisis. And we know that burning of fossil fuels is related to destabilizing our life-giving climate. And I think what the oil industry is very much about here is trying not to have a second strike against it in terms of public health risk and worker safety. So we're getting people that have classic symptoms of chemical illness from this hazardous waste, oil, that are being, I believe, misdiagnosed with food poisoning and heat stroke. So we are, this would be a second huge strike against oil if people really knew that this stuff is toxic. And it's coming out the tailpipes of our automobiles, and it's a problem. We really do need to get off it, and I think that that's the big thing that industry is trying to prevent. It's trying to prevent a bigger backlash against fossil fuel use. And I think it's time that we as a people look at the cost, the true cost of our energy dependency here, and add in those costs. It's not all about benefit from oil. There's a lot of cost, too, and I think we're seeing that in the Gulf.
Some people have suggested that the oil well was, this is a theory that's floating around out in the ethers on the internet and stuff. Some people have suggested that the oil well was drilled into the side of a natural volcano to release pressure buildup to protect the overall oil well being and industry investments in the Gulf, claiming that if this volcano had naturally exploded, it would have been destroyed all the oil industry rigs, so that this was done as a well-oiled, pun intended, operation to release the pressure to protect the industry. And the effects are the unfortunate side effects of this decision would be the results that we're seeing now, and would also explain the lack of government intervention, the staged press conferences, huge stock sell-offs prior to this event, and the overall lack of serious cleanup efforts. And I'm wondering, Dr. Ott, if you agree or if you have any insights to this theory.
I do know that after the Exxon Valdez, there were theories that the Exxon Valdez had run intentionally aground, and I just my commitment on March 24th, 1989, was to work upstream of these spills, because wherever we drill, we seem to spill. So I would like really to focus my energy on shifting, a reasonable transition, like in the next 10 years, off of fossil fuels. I think we know enough to make this happen, and it's a matter of political will right now. And I'm hoping we can use this event in the Gulf for whatever reason it was caused to say that, you know what, this is too much. We've poisoned the ocean. We're poisoning our local communities, upturning people's lives. There are other people on this planet besides the oil industry, and we happen to live our lives by choice differently, you know, as real estate people, as commercial fishermen, as charter fishermen, as just our culture. As people said in Louisiana, I don't want BP's money. I want my community. And that we have to acknowledge that these people have rights to live the way they want to live, and it's not all wrapped around oil. And we need to start reining in the oil industry as a whole so that the rest of us can live the way we want to live without this big threat in our backyard.
That's a good point. Well, Debbie writes in a question from Texas. She asks, is it true that the administration refused and is still refusing the help of fleets of skimmer ships from Europe and other places? If so, if those ships had been deployed in a timely fashion, would this have diminished the environmental impact by any noticeable amount? Do you have any answer for that?
I think it's a shame at this point. This is so big. I think we should bring all tools to bear on it. I don't care what country owns them. So I think that in the case of Exxon Valdez, we had a Russian skimmer in. I think part of what's going on here is where do you put the oil once you pick it up? And I think there's some reluctance to actually pick up this oil because what do you do with it when you pick it up? It's a waste that the industry then has to deal with. I mean, I really don't know why we aren't allowing other people to help. I mean, we aren't that arrogant as a country. And no, BP obviously does not have all the solutions. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this big of a mess. So I think what we have here is a lack of our political leadership, the federal government. I mean, it's one thing to leave the spiller in charge of the response with, you know, the boom, the burning, the dispersants that we already know 20 years ago didn't work. Why are we doing this again? But then it's a whole other thing to say to the federal government, well, okay, BP, it doesn't seem to be working so well, so we're actually going to bring in, I mean, we should be monitoring this as a federal government. And if the spiller is failing, we don't just go down with the ship here. We bring in other expertise. I mean, give the spiller a chance. If they blow it, bring in help. And I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting that people keep calling this a spill because a spill is coming from a definite amount of a container holding a certain amount of oil, and this is still leaking right now as we're talking on the air tonight while we're sleeping or having dinners with our family. This isn't going away. This isn't an 8-hour-a-day job kind of thing. This is continuously happening every minute of every day. And do you see any end in sight? What is your hope that comes out of all of this?
Well, I see a reservoir under the earth that is continuing to spill oil, and I don't know how big that reservoir is. I guess we could call it a leak, but there seems to be more than one leak as well. So I guess my hope is that we have this 6-month ban on offshore drilling, that sticks, and that during that 6-month period, not only do we find out the causes of this, but we also, as a people, insist that Congress take a hard look at the costs of our fossil fuel dependency. And I also hope that groups, while we're waiting the 6 months, will take the initiative to start setting up solar industries, wind industries, so that when the 6 months is over, and Anadarko and the other companies want to come back. Anadarko, which, by the way, went to Brazil, which does require these valves, so interesting there. But so that when these companies come back, we can say, you know what, we don't need you anymore. I mean, I would love to see that happen. I would love to see this disaster turned around and transformed. The people realize this is about a sovereignty issue. And it's not, I'm not talking British petroleum. I'm talking who rules? Is it democracy with the people and our values, our lives? our quality of life counting more than corporate capitalism, and corporate capitalism's drive to make money at all costs. Money's not the only thing on the planet, neither is oil. And our values, our lives need to count. And I'd like to
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And I want to say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the information that you've shared here, and best of luck very much. Anybody listening, you can find out more information about Dr. Ott's cause at rickyott.com, RIKIOTT.com. Thanks so much for joining me, Dr. Ott.
You're very welcome.
My next guest joining me from the UK is Peter Tyler. Peter is a science analyst and policy advisor to all levels of government, the voluntary sector, international NGOs, the EU, and the UN. In 1978, he set up and directed the Political Ecology Research Group in Oxford, pioneering critical environmental review and the service of leading scientists and lawyers in the protection of communities and biodiversity. He was involved in government reviews of ocean pollution and the UN system of oversight and protection, and participated in the development of the precautionary principle and moves toward clean production technology. From 2000 to 2003, he sat on the UK government's National Advisory Group for the Community Renewables Initiative and has taken a long-standing interest in the environmental impact of energy-related developments. In addition to his scientific training, Peter has a diploma in social anthropology from Oxford and has studied systems of thought, magic, causation, and healing among tribal peoples in Africa. He has also trained with North and South American shamans, worked within the Celtic traditions, and is a long-standing adherent of Himalayan yogic practice, where he specializes in breathing and meditation teaching for health professionals. Thank you so much for joining me, Peter. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Hillary.
How do you see this event?
How do I see it? I actually see it and feel it more from a kind of consciousness perspective than a pollution perspective, even though that's my main background. There have been incidents in the Gulf which have been bigger than this, which people tend to forget. One off the coast of Mexico, which largely only impacted Mexico, and it was several times bigger than this current leak. The environment, in a way, can cope with this sort of impact. It's more a question of what it really means to us, because although it's really heartening to hear people's concern, I also spend quite a bit of time in the blogosphere talking to essentially climate activists. I've recently spent quite a bit of time looking at climate science. And I've been quite appalled. A lot of American conversations. So there is a huge kind of middle America that actually sees limitations on oil exploration in a very different light, and doesn't get the message fundamentally from this, which is that we are fouling our own nest in that sense. Beautiful coastlines and beautiful creatures. And for me, it's not a question of how many and whether they will recover and so forth. It's really listening to what this really means on a deeper level. And we are dependent on oil, and that's not really going to change very much. And the more dependent we are, the more risks we seem willing to take, including deep water drilling. I'd like to see a moratorium on deep water drilling. We have drills off the coast of Scotland, just as deep as this, and there were moves in the UK Parliament to have a moratorium, which was dismissed. And they just simply said, well, our safety procedures are in place, and we have every confidence in them. Mm-hmm. But whether it's due to negligence or whether it's a pure unlucky event, these things are going to happen, and it's the price that we pay for our dependency, really.
Why do you think there's so much resistance to move into more of a green energy format? Why is the world so hesitant to jump into that?
I'm not sure that I would agree that the world is that hesitant. If you look at governments throughout the European Union and the Obama administration, they are embracing at least the need to develop renewable technologies. There's nothing new in the way of technology needs to be developed. All the renewables are a lot more expensive than fossil fuels are right now. Wind, for example, is about twice as expensive. Biofuels, roughly 3 times. Solar, anything up to 10 times more expensive per unit of energy produced. So Western economies simply couldn't cope with that sort of price increase across the board. And this hasn't really been taken on board by the green movement, really. They don't do their sums. And I helped found the green movement, so I'm not kind of critical of green philosophy, but currently they're not really being very realistic.
So do you think there's a political agenda behind the Gulf incident?
I don't personally. I think it's an accident born of cost cutting, and from what I've seen, from some distance from the events, the oil companies involved. It was a general thing when I was working with the UN on pollution control that the regulators and the industry are they're very close. They know exactly what's going on. And so the regulators turn a blind eye and the companies cut costs because they're operating on the margin, really, in this kind of deep water drilling. And so it's a bit of both, I think. And obviously the U.S. administration wants to blame the company, and there's been a lot of kind of blaming, as well as I actually think there's quite a big effort to try and clean it up going on. But as it's continuing to spew out and everything's failed, this could go on for some time. Maybe a relief drilling operation would take effect in August, but it's not impossible that it could be simply irreparably damaged and that it could go on.
Peter, I've had some people suggest the theory, which I spoke with my first guest, that this is an underwater volcano and this was done to release pressure from it, so not to threaten the rest of the oil industry rigs. Yeah. Do you feel that is a possibility?
I'm not technically qualified to really have an opinion, but from an intuitive perspective, no, I wouldn't think so. The pressures involved where volcanoes are concerned are enormous, and a tiny little hole in the seabed like this, I don't think would be powerful enough to relieve any such pressures. So I think that's just kind of
just one of the theories out there.
Yeah.
So this is just, so it's sad, but it really comes down to greed and incompetence, don't you think, on some level?
Yeah, it is. I think it is sad, and what saddens me more is that people are not getting the message. They're really not looking at this from a kind of like the earth actually speaking to us, that we have this oil spilling out and covering a really pristine and beautiful coastline, and we are fouling our own nest. And for a lot of people, this is a price worth paying for the kind of civil order that they have. But actually, that civil order is very, very unstable. And it's made more unstable by its dependency on oil, fossil fuels. And you can't simply replace fossil fuels with renewables. Renewables are a very dispersed form of energy, and it's vastly expensive to collect all that energy together. It won't work unless we decentralize our systems of living and reduce our demand. And the economic models that we continue to embrace don't allow for that. They're going in the opposite direction. And unfortunately, America, in many ways, has led the world in high consumption and private transport systems and the whole deal. So it's very hard for a country like the U.S. to adapt. Much easier for a country like Holland, for example. But either way, the future requires a huge shift in consciousness.
Which actually brings me to my next question. And Peter, you have such an impressive government background, but you also have a very profound spiritual background as well. How do you see the world of industry and consumerism? Is there hope to be able to reconnect with a higher level of love and compassion for each other in the business world?
I'm working on that. I've been having meetings recently with people in the financial world who have been very chastened by the events of the last 2 or 3 years, and their world has completely changed. And I'm finding people there who do care and want to make amends. And we've had some very strong conversations where I've challenged them and said, look, there are 2 billion people on this planet. 75% of them are involved in subsistence agriculture, and they are in poverty and very vulnerable to climate change. And none of the development aid, none of the investments are reaching these people. And a tiny percentage of financial investment is what we would call ethical and sustainable. In fact, you have special funds labeled ethical investment, which means that the vast majority, 99.9% of the financial world, is not ethical. And they admit that. They completely agree. They nod their heads. I said, well, what are we going to do about it? And they just say, we're trapped. We are absolutely trapped. And they don't see a way of helping the rest of the world. And they don't see a way of turning the investment policies around. What we've seen in Britain and the European Union is vast amounts of money given to the banks. And then our own industries, small businesses especially, saying, well, hang on, the banks are not lending it to us. Well, of course not. They're lending it to companies investing in China and India, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, where there is still economic growth of 5 to 8%, whereas in most of Europe and North America, economic growth is stuttering along at 0.5% or 1% or whatever. And so that's the system, and it has created a great deal of wealth. But unfortunately, it's also created a huge discrepancy in the world and a lot of potential instability. And the question is, can that system respond to these issues, energy, the transition, peak oil, climate change, and so forth. And so far, I mean, we're still meeting, and I'm still looking at it and seeing if there's anything that I can do. And I kind of hedge my bets, really, because when I talk to my shamanic friends, the message is completely different. It can't be turned around. The earth herself will intervene, whether you want to call it Gaia, or in India it would be Kali. It's like the mother, the creatrix that is our source, will intervene. And that is the message that we're getting. And I was told this 30 years ago by my Himalayan master. And so far, we've had a number of kind of little warnings, like the volcano in Iceland, and then all the airplanes disappearing out of the sky. And I see this as a warning as well, that the Earth and the solar system, particularly the sun, are immensely powerful. We haven't seen much in the last 200 years of our industrial civilization. I mean, just one event, for example, I visited the States in February to talk with climate scientists in Boulder, Colorado. And it was interesting, actually, because a friend of mine who was hosting my visit, we went up into the Rockies and we visited a valley where his grandfather had been on some kind of conservation corps work program. And as we went up, he showed me all the dying pine trees and said that everyone's very worried because they're suffering from beetle infestation due to global warming. And I said, well, that's very interesting, because the hottest year in the U.S. record was 1934. And as we got to the valley, there was a plaque which showed where the conservation camp was, where his grandfather was working. And lo and behold, the plaque said 1934. And what that work camp was doing was cutting down infested pine trees from the beetles.
Oh.
And on the photograph, it looked identical. Nothing much had changed. So the climate comes in cycles, and I really don't feel that humans have affected the climate that much. I think it's overplayed very, very much.
Yeah.
But in those conversations with the climate scientists, I have a sense that science has kind of lost the plot. It's relying on kind of a virtual reality of computer models, and it's ignoring some very, very basic facts about that's not even the cosmos, actually, just our solar system. Another synchronicity was that we visited Denver's art gallery, a Daniel Libeskind building, which I didn't like very much, but it worked inside very well. And I was particularly interested to visit all the Native American exhibits. And it was amazing. The whole floor was devoted to Native American art. And obviously that's mostly handicraft, and the different tribal areas around the whole of the continent. It was really beautiful. But they had a little bit of a gallery of the artwork of the first settlers. And could have come straight out of some sort of Scottish castle, really, oil paintings of landscapes. There was a painting of Denver. And it was basically two rivers meeting and a buffalo and a tree. Lots of plains. And the painting was dated 1859. And that is such a synchronicity, because in 1859 there was what we call a mega flare, a solar flare. And at the time, there were hardly any electrical systems, just telegraph wires, which melted down, and telegraph operators got their fingers burnt. Now, in 2008, the National Academy of Sciences made a report to Congress. I don't know if you've heard of this, probably not, on something called the Carrington event in 1859. Most people haven't a clue about this. Everyone knows about global warming, which is a kind of computerized projection, a virtual reality projected into sort of 50 or 100 years' time. And nobody knows about the Carrington event. But if that was repeated, and NASA at the moment is very worried that it will be, if that is repeated, it could take down the electrical grid over the whole of the United States, in fact, the Northern Hemisphere, possibly even the globe. And that would be irreparable, largely because you haven't got any machines or industry to operate to actually carry out the repairs. And the report to Congress makes very, very scary reading, because you go back to 1859 and everybody was provided locally with food and water. All of the pumping systems would fail, all of the transport systems would fail, and there'd be no communications. Civilization would come to a halt overnight.
Yeah, people don't realize the connection between the sun activity and the cycles of the earth. Peter, do you feel that that's because we have just, as consciousness become sort of disconnected with our own hearts and our own sense of what consciousness is, we've become, how do you see that spiritually?
I agree. It's about a shift in consciousness that's occurred over the last 2,000 years, really. But in my work, and I've written a book which 3/4 of it is about climate theory. It's called Chill, a reassessment of global warming theory. But in the last chapter, I make some comments about what I've learned of the whole kind of computerized science world. They don't recognize cycles. They can't handle irregular periods. They don't use spiral mathematics. Any of those inputs would have altered their worldview. And those are all kind of elements of the feminine mind. So we're dealing with almost like an amputation of consciousness, that the feminine side of the brain has been put to sleep. And it shows in the nature of the science itself. And as for the disconnect, it goes deeper, I think, than the heart. In the work we do here, we focus very much on the dance, and something we learned from Native American tradition, really, the way that Native Americans dance. And they dance by bringing in the energy of the earth in through the base chakra, if you like, if you want to use yogic terminology. And so when a group of Native Americans dance, they are dancing in a very powerful way because they're already connected to the earth and their hearts. But when we started to learn to dance here, it's a whole learning process because we're not really connected to the earth. We're not free. We don't know where we belong. We don't know where our food is coming from. We don't tend to the land. There is not just a disconnect, but a fear, an insecurity, also in the United States. It's a base insecurity, and people are concerned about their mortgage, their home, their job. And that insecurity is fostered by the financial system, the governmental political ideology.
Yeah.
Keep people insecure and afraid, and they will do things they would not normally do, which is one, surrender their will.
Which is what's happening. Peter, we're out of time, and I have to say thank you so much.
Yeah.
No, what you've shared with us is very, very precious, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on the air. Thanks so much.
Well, it's very encouraging to be able to do this across the huge divide.
Across the ocean.
Yeah.
Well, have a wonderful evening there in the UK. Thanks so much. Next joining me is a very special woman. Her name is Gail Swanson. She's the author of The Heart of Love, Mary Magdalene Speaks. After moving from New Jersey 13 years ago to Sarasota, Florida, Gail spent many nights and days on the sands and in the water of the magnificent Gulf of Mexico. She walked the crystal sands and bathed in the healing Gulf waters, and she feels that this magical area was the catalyst that opened her to receive a life-changing vision. She was shown her connection to Mary Magdalene, and soon a communication with Mary began. She was guided to share these messages to bring forth the power of the divine feminine and to help to heal and balance the masculine and feminine energies of the world. She speaks today to express her love for these waters and its inhabitants, and to discuss the extreme importance of our spiritual connection to all the waters of earth. And she joins us now with a very special message. Welcome, Gail.
Hi, Hillary. Thank you for having me. Well, geez.
So what message do you have to share today, Gail?
It's just interesting listening to your other two guests because I feel so thankful that we have Dr. Ott, who is the voice of reason, and Peter, who was just on, who is sort of, straddling both worlds, which we need more of. And, I'm kind of, always kind of on that higher view of, as you said, moving here and being introduced to the Gulf, which I had never even seen before. And, I just think that there is such a deep connection, as Peter was saying, that we truly do have with the earth and the waters, and that we have forgotten. And I just think about all the people, the fishermen and all of this, and this is their livelihood, and they love these waters for many reasons. And the other side of that is just loving it simply for its beauty and for the nourishment that it gives us and the joy that we get when I'm swimming in that Gulf and the pelicans fly low down over your head. The feeling that you get is just so incredible. Everybody always, goes, that's how it makes me feel. And to hear, I didn't even want to get into all this. I mean, I watch a little bit of it every day, but I almost can't, take too much of it. I think most of us can't. But to hear of the complete irreverence for life, even when, they are no longer living, and to be putting them it's just, inconceivable to me. And I do feel that what Peter was saying is true, that everyone has gotten so far away from the connection to the water, to all the living beings, to every form of life, to just, making a buck and doing everything they have to do and like blindly just going forward, doing things that are just unthinkable. And this is where we are now. So I don't know. I was going to have a more, sweet message, but I feel kind of...
Well, as a truthful message, we have to take a break in a few minutes, but what do you feel is the higher vision for this event, Gail?
I feel that both of your guests touched on it, and I do feel that hopefully, I hope and pray that we all wake up and that and make the changes that that need to be. So I don't know. I wanted to read the call of the
let's do that before we go to a break, because I know we had a segment planned for you and it's been shortened a bit. So let's get right to the message, because you sent that to me and I feel it's very important that gets shared.
Okay, so this is one of the messages I received from swimming with these beautiful creatures. Freedom dwells only in equality. Those who exist in the sea emanate a loving vibration of freedom, their purpose to imbue us with the joy and exaltation that freedom brings. Our hearts leap with joy as we bear witness to their majesty. Our souls remember what joy is found in unbridled playfulness. There is spiritual nourishment where the sea and sky meet. There is magic where the sea and sky meet and the majestic ones play. There is hope and wisdom riding on their backs. There is honor and nobility in their eyes. There is love of family as they glide side by side, all elements of nature harmoniously existing and serving humanity. As we move through this most crucial time, these keepers of light and knowledge call to us, sing to us, blessing us with all that they are. They are calling us home. They are awakening our hearts. They speak the language of universal love. They ride the waves of multidimensionality. They beckon us to remember we are one heart, one world, one magnificent creation, born to remember love. They are ever so joyfully willing to commune with us, connecting our hearts to the sea and the sky and to each one of them. They are aiding us in ways that are beyond our comprehension at this time. They call us forth now to meditate upon the sea, the sky, the sun, and the moon, to breathe in the stars of heaven, and to merge with our ancient and wise brothers and sisters of the sea as humanity strives to restore balance on earth.
Gail Swanson, everybody, thank you so much for that. We have to go to break, and joining us back when we come back from break will be Barbara Hanclau. Thank you, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Hillary Raimo, and you're listening to a very special 2-hour broadcast on the Gulf oil leak situation happening as we speak. Before we went to break, we were speaking with Gail Swanson, author of The Heart of Love, Mary Magdalene Speaks, and she shared with us a very, very special and beautiful message that she had received from working with the energy of the Gulf. And we're going to continue with Gail for a while. I have some more questions for her. Gail, before we went to break, I was asking you what you felt was your higher vision for this event. And you read us your beautiful message. Is there any continuation of that vision that you'd like to share with us?
I just feel that the whole event has to have a higher purpose, because I've been very fortunate to see what I call the higher view at with certain events and certain times. I'm not particularly sure what this one is. It's so enormous. But I would like to just share one thing, and this is, I think that if everyone could see something like this in their lives, it would change everything. I had, and it's very, meaningful for this situation also, as far as how we conduct ourselves and how we feel about what's going on, and how we just, conduct our own lives. And I think, I mentioned to you how, this is like a as within, without. So, all the things that are going on in our own lives that we are held down in this muck is, manifested, in the outer. And my best friend from childhood became very ill. She had cancer, and she was becoming more weak and very sick, and she was an artist, and she was a beautiful, beautiful soul. And it was one of those stories that you hear about all the time, but I was, blessed to see it how she just moved through this whole thing with such grace, and she never complained, and she never said she was in pain. And I would speak to her every day. I was here in Florida, and she was in New Jersey. And we were having all kinds of very interesting things happen, and many things happened to us in the Gulf, both of us, when she would come to visit me in between her treatments. So we had this connection. And it was the first day when she was unable to walk anymore. She couldn't get out of bed. She was told she cannot walk anymore. And I called her, and she said, "Oh, Gail, this is so terrible. I'm watching on television," and it was Katrina. And I said, "Oh, honey, turn that off. You know, you have so much on your mind, and, you know, don't look at it." She said, "I can't help it." And I've only had this happen a very few times, but my eyes were open, and I began to have a vision in front of me, and I could see that there was like a golden thread almost going from her. I could see the entire family standing on the roof in Katrina. And what I was shown was that the grace with which she was not able to get out of the bed, but so accepting and loving towards everyone, was literally sustaining these people. And I'm telling you that every time I tell this, I still get the chills. And I tell it every chance I can, because it changed me in such a profound way, because I could see and I was shown that what we do in our own lives with grace and humility and integrity and love changes things that we may never know and never see, but it really can change the world. And if everyone were more, grace-filled, I really think things would be a lot better.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree, and I want to thank you, Gail, for staying with me through the break and sharing your beautiful message and being a part of this today. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, we have on Barbara Hand-Clow has now joined us. Barbara is an international Mayan elder, Cherokee record keeper, an internationally acclaimed ceremonial teacher, and author of many books, including my personal favorite, one of them anyway, The Mind Code, Time Acceleration, and Awakening the World Mind. She will be discussing tonight the unique relationship between world events in the Mayan calendar and of time resonation with the 102,000-year regional underworld of the Mayan calendar, and how the oil spill began at exactly the 9500 BC point, the time of the Great Catalysm during the end of the global maritime civilization, the fall of Atlantis. Because of this relationship, Barbara claims that the oil volcano is either the beginning of a great extinction or is the trigger for the psychic processing of ourselves as a multi-traumatized species. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, Hillary. How are you?
I'm really great. I'm so happy you're here.
Good. I'm happy to be here, too.
So where do we start? What is your personal beliefs behind all this, Barbara? Where do you stand on this event?
Well, that was a good summary of my own personal response to it. When the event actually happened, April 19th, 20th, 21st, I was working with time resonation factors in the calendar, and I was waiting to see what would happen at that point, because whatever would happen at that point is a trigger for us as a species to start processing inner trauma from the past that we have not yet cleared yet. And so even though this situation is absolutely horrendous, and I can't imagine anything worse that could have happened, it also is a signal that we're coming to a point of major change in the consciousness of our species. And you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of change could that be? And in my case, I have a Cherokee background and also some Mayan training in this lifetime. And I've had some experience in this lifetime in ceremonial work where we've been in resonation with the planet. And then, of course, many, many thousands of years ago, all of us were in resonance with the planet. And so I think what's happening is we're getting, kicked in the pants, in a sense, to move back into resonation with the planet, because when we're in that state of consciousness, we're profoundly different beings. So I think that's what's happening to us. I think we're being forced to move back into the actual consciousness with the planet at this time.
Mm-hmm. And you often talk about this. You've come on my show quite a bit, and you've often talked about how people in general have repressed memories of the 10,500 BC event, the cataclysmic event that happened in our DNA. It's in our consciousness. And with so many reactive spectrums going on, from people being, they just go through so many emotional reactions to this: fear, sadness, anger, helplessness, hope, trying to cope with what they're feeling. Is this a catalyst actually to move us through these, or how are people getting stuck? How do you see that part of it?
Well, I think it really is a catalyst for healing. Now, when I was a child, I was trained by my Cherokee grandfather, and for like 17, 18 years, pretty consistently, so a great deal of time in my life. And he said that, like many indigenous people do, he said that until we remembered our story, that we could never heal. He said that we were profoundly separated from the story of our species and the story of our journey on the planet. And so it seems that this event, the pain of this event, is what's actually taking us back into the ability to recall our story. And then when you know your story, then you move into consciousness and resonance with the planet itself. And this event, Hillary, is much bigger than people at this point realize, as far as I'm concerned. Another thing that's in one of my books, Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, is a discussion of the abiotic oil theory. And the abiotic oil theory is a theory about oil as a renewable resource that comes from Thomas Gold, who was a very famous scientist who just died a few years ago. And Thomas Gold actually proved that oil is a renewable resource, and that the tap into the oil is around 5 to 6 miles below the surface. So we haven't just tapped into a little pocket of oil. The other theory, the theory that we grew up with about oil, was that the planet was filled with all these pockets of oil that came from rotting matter from millions of years ago. And it turns out that's not true. And so we haven't just tapped into a pocket, a deposit of oil. We've actually tapped into the source of the planetary blood. And that's why this is such a big deal, much bigger than anybody realizes at this time.
Do you think, Barbara, that this was an accident, or?
Yes, I do think it's an accident, but it's an accident by corporate America. There's another issue here. We're resonating with different... We're resonating with different Night Sixes of the different underworlds. There's actually a whole series of them. And the Night Six that we're resonating with in the previous underworld, the industrial underworld, is the development of planetary control by means of corporations. And so this type of incident, this type of control over the planetary resources itself, could only have been accomplished by corporations. So from that point of view, you could almost say this is deliberate, except that none of these people really wanted it to work out this way either. So it's kind of hard sometimes to call it an accident. I mean, how do you call something an accident when it was inevitable that it had to happen eventually, judging by the way they were using resources?
What do you think is the Earth's message as her blood spills out into this and we tap such a deep vein? What do you see as the Earth message to us right now?
I really think the Earth's message is for us to tune into the inner part of ourselves that actually resonates with the planet. And if you watch people closely, it's been really fascinating to watch people. A great number of people around me have been sick for the last 2.5, 3 months, including myself. I've had a series of health complaints that are really bizarre. And so if you watch yourself closely, people are even feeling this event to the point of their own personal health. And this is teaching us that we're much more deeply connected with our home than we thought we were. We've gotten radically disconnected from our home itself.
So as people find and recover these repressed memories, they're realizing that these grand cycles aren't separate of them. This event isn't separate from us. And what can they do to reconnect? How would you suggest somebody who's struggling with this to the point of depression or anger, or they live down there and their livelihoods are going away? How would you explain their processing?
that's a very, very difficult one. Imagine one of the people who's actually directly affected by this. And this is actually an issue of major public health issue, because another thing going on in this situation is not just the oil. Also, the other thing that's being released in gigantic quantities is methane. And the methane release is potentially extremely toxic for the people who live in that region. It's actually a very, very dangerous issue. This is one of the things that there's kind of you're not supposed to really talk about this, but I'll say what I want to say no matter what.
Well, you're on my show. You can say whatever you want.
Yeah, right. So the issue would be that people who are living near the shore and down in that region are actually in danger, and I think it's a significantly enough danger that I think evacuation should be looked at.
Yeah.
In fact, I think, for instance, if you consider what China would do, I think China would be evacuating people at this point. So
intuitively, I feel the same thing. Intuitively, I think that's the truth.
Yeah, and I feel it's a major public health issue, and I think for those of us who are concerned, I think we need to be connected with this and prepared to assist in this situation, because this is really, truly just a gigantic disaster.
It's really overwhelming. I think people get very tired of dealing with it in a sense. They're sick of hearing it already. Yeah. But the thing is that this isn't a spill. This is ongoing. This hasn't stopped yet. So the effects of this are continuing and continuing. And it's not, this isn't an 8-hour kind of, workday shift. This is a 24-hour nonstop system that's coming into our environment on a regular basis.
That's right.
Barbara, what I was thinking about when I asked you to come on the show was this important relationship between the Mayan calendar and this, and how some people are taking these as prophecy fulfillments and running with that in a lot of different ways and some of them create fear to the point of paralyzing people to have any kind of effective action. How do they combat that?
Well, the way I look at that one is we're in the middle of some major astrological cycles right now, too. And we're in the middle of a series of eclipses that are actually like creating kind of a gigantic lock on reality. We're in the middle of a situation right now where it's kind of like you're stuck right where you are. And the only change that you can actually effectuate is to change yourself. And so as I've watched this situation continue as it is, I just continue to look at the American government and Obama, and I keep screaming, why don't you stop the war? Why don't you stop the war? In other words, speaking of something that people could do, it's outrageous that the United States continues to carry on wars in the world when a situation as critical as this is going on right in the country. It's unbelievable, really. And I think another thing that all of us should be feeling right now is just a tremendously huge feeling of rage that this country could go on like this. The eclipses, by the way, are saying, and the timing of the eclipses, are saying change, 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 and yet nothing changes.
What do you think it's going to take for us to really get it?
Well, you'd think this would, wouldn't you? You know what I mean? At this point, I'm standing back and going, I can't believe that this isn't causing massive levels of change right now. And the Earth, by the way, is very much alive and very responsive. And if there isn't some change, there's going to be more response on the part of the Earth. Like the eclipse cycle, June 26th and July 11th in the next couple of weeks are showing that there's going to be hurricanes and earthquakes and solar flares and everything if there isn't some kind of level of change here. So I think if people are feeling kind of a sense of rage, they should be. At this point, we have reason to be justifiably very angry.
We have a very strange relationship with our anger. I think most people have a very hard time. They don't have a good relationship with their anger. They can't express it. They're afraid of it. They don't know how to do it in a way that is productive. They don't know how to take anger and transform it into some kind of positive production. We've become very dysfunctional.
And there's just anger, and then there's anger that's coming from having not faced yourself. You see the difference? And this one is pushing us right up against the edge of facing the consequences of what's going on. And then the natural, healthy response is actually a very just anger. And so I'm hoping that people will be able to motivate themselves then into their own part of action in this, because there are many, many things that people can do. And there are going to be many, many things developing now that are going to enable people to do things about this. We've got to move it at this point.
But, what do people do, Barbara? Do they get in their car and they drive down there? Do they protest? I mean, are we looking at a revolution on the grand scale of this time thing? I mean, was this a time frame for other events that were like this?
Yeah, I don't think people drive down there. I think it's exactly the opposite. They need to be driving out. But I think there are lots of ways that people are kind of still stunned right now. First of all, when the whole thing happened in the first place, then supposedly BP was doing everything, and of course they're not. There's a little bit of involvement at this point on the part of the National Guard, but you would think that you'd see more participation in the situation right from the military forces and the National Guard in the United States, that in terms of response down there. But I think in terms of individual response, there needs to be fundraising, there needs to be charities and groups of people who are helping on this, because people really, really are going to need help.
Yeah, I was just in touch with a fabulous person. His name is Jesse Hicks today, in fact, who's putting together a wonderful documentary. And I was hoping that he would be able to call in tonight. And it's called Dark Horizon, a documentary about the Gulf oil disaster. And you can go to his Kickstarter.com/projects, Dear Jesse /Dark Horizon. There's going to be a link on my website where you can look at this project. I'm hopefully going to be involved with this film. And this is a kind of example, Barbara, of what people can do. You know, what could I asked myself that question, and I said, okay, I have this Facebook page. I have, X amount of people on here. I can post things that I'm finding in my research, but, I can also make airtime available to gather a group of people who can speak on the topic and give listeners, their opinions and string together a theme, an intent to help really come out. I'm not mainstream media. Nobody produces my shows except myself. I have a wonderful co-producer who helps behind the scenes, but the content that comes through my radio show is independent, and I am not tied to all the strings that mainstream media are tied to. So my gift into this is this show. And I encourage people who have the skills, who have the ability to do different things, to start doing it. Because we all have something unique to offer, and we have to realize that action, it's not about standing up and being an angry person, although we should be angry, to be honest with you, because we're being lied to about what's going on down there. It's being covered up. And to be honest with you, whatever the theories are behind what it happened or what started this, it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call. Yep. The earth is huge, and her belly is big, and she can birth new things all the time. She's been here for a very long time. She'll be here for a very long time when we leave. It will rejuvenate itself. It will come back. We may not be here to watch it, because we're, the way we are with our planet is scary. We don't take the time.
Yeah, and so the issue for me, what is my personal part on this? Well, as you know, on my website, I'm using my website as a coaching device now, season by season, and new moon by new moon, to help people move through this. And so when this whole situation hit, meanwhile, astrologically, the astrology is saying that it's time to really go into the deepest depths of our personal character. The astrology is saying that who we each are as an individual right now matters a huge amount, and that each one of us needs to go into the deepest levels of questioning about what are our values, what are we giving, what are we creating, because this event itself is happening in order to bring out that level of commitment and awareness on our part. And so that's really what this whole thing is all about. I mean, as an individual, we can't change what's happening down there in a physical way, but our response to it involves the response to the consciousness of the planet. And that's what the planet's asking us for. It's almost like with the planet suffering the way she is, if we didn't realize it and we didn't see it and we didn't feel that, then what would anything matter? And so how we're responding and how we feel matters a lot. And for me, it's actually been a matter of just staying on even keel physically. I can't believe the symptoms that my body is going through. And I'm a great distance from this thing. I'm way up in Vancouver, British Columbia. But I'm feeling
it too. I think everybody's feeling it. The animals are feeling it. I've had more people come to me this week that with pets having physical symptoms. Their organs are, enlarged. They have. I think everybody's. And why wouldn't they, Barbara? Because we're all connected. I want to thank you for taking this time to join me and share this information. It's very important. And thank you for coming on the air for this segment to share this. And anybody listening who would like to participate in her segments online with her website, it's handcloud2012.com, and her posts are fabulous. I read them every single I count on them, by the way, Barbara, so don't ever stop doing them. Thanks so much for joining me.
Okay, Hillary, thanks for doing the show.
Bye, Barbara. Bye, thanks. Okay, on the calls, we have Jesse Hicks joining me. I want to say welcome very much. I was just speaking about you. Hi, Jesse.
Hi, Hillary.
Well, I am very excited that we connected today because I didn't do much justice in explaining your film that I just plugged a little earlier. So why don't you tell me and everybody listening about what the project that you're working on?
Yeah, we're working on a documentary about this disaster, which is obviously a huge event, and it affects millions of people, and there's lots of facets, and it's very complicated. And our documentary is a work in progress. So, we've been down there and we shot with some locals in Grand Isle, and we got some great stuff and met some amazing people, and we're encouraged to go down. So we're going to go. I'm actually on my way back down there on Tuesday, and we're just going to keep at it and try to gather more footage, meet more people, and really try to shape the documentary into something that will reach a lot of people and impact a lot of people, and hopefully, I guess what I really want to do is make the connection between what's going on down there and the way we live, as Americans and globally, I guess, in other first world countries. But our consumption has something to do with what's going on right now. And I think a lot of people, maybe they know that, but they don't really feel that connection. And that's one of the goals of this film. But this film, of course, will develop as we continue to work on it.
Mm-hmm. What did you see down there?
When we were down there, we were there relatively a while ago. I guess it was about 3.5, 4 weeks. We saw lots of fishermen who were not fishing but were working with BP. And they're all very closed off to us because BP doesn't want them to talk to the media or any sort of media-related people, including independent filmmakers and reporters. We saw them, and we saw oil. There's oil everywhere, and there's oil in the water. Where we were in Grand Isle at that point, it was before it had really come to the surface and congealed in the way that you see in a lot of the more recent, news video coverage. But it was still everywhere, and anyone who had been out in the water doing any sort of cleanup, their vessels and all their equipment was covered in oil. And it was mostly just at that point, the people were in shock and really worried about a way of life being destroyed and an industry being destroyed, and not really sure what was going to happen next. And I don't think they are still, but at that point, I think they were still in this shock phase.
Mm-hmm. Now, were people willing to speak to you, or did you have a hard time getting people to talk to you?
It was a mix. Anyone who was working with BP, which was quite a large number of the people down there, they were hesitant to speak to us, and most of them didn't want to. We had a couple of fishermen who let us sort of shoot their boat and talk to them. We tried to frame their faces out of our shots, so they spoke to us anonymously, essentially. But then we found some people. There's also some people that we found who were very upset about the efforts that were being done to protect the area and to clean up the oil. So since they were sort of at odds with BP's efforts, they were willing to speak with us.
Did you find a lot of frustration? I'm sure you found a lot of frustration, but did you find frustration in regards to being able to tell the truth about what's happening?
I think there was frustration in what was being put out there on a larger scale. You know, I mean, frustration with what was being heard in the news, and there's been, you know, several videos. Ours is just a trailer, but there's some clips that support this, but then other longer ones of fishermen who, I don't know all their backstories, but for whatever reason were unafraid to speak out against BP and basically say that, you know, there's some stuff's being done, but not as much as you're made to think by the news media. I mean, this is from other sources, but that voice is definitely out there, and we perceive that as well. That said, there's a lot of people who are working for BP. That was our perception, but the question of how effective that work is a whole other thing to be determined.
Mm-hmm. And were people concerned about the health effects of what they're experiencing down there?
Absolutely. I mean, for a lot of the fishermen, the only the obvious choice for employment now that the fisheries are essentially closed down around Grand Isle, and I think something like 20% of the waters in the entire Gulf and more right around Louisiana, their obvious source of employment would be to work for BP and clean up. But some people had read, you know, reports and books, probably from your first guest also, about how the dispersants and the cleanup has detrimental health effects. So a lot of them just didn't want to participate in that, which basically left them with few options on, you know, finding a source of income. Mm-hmm. So those people felt trapped, very understandably, and yeah, it's a pretty crazy situation. Without, you know, everyone was mobilized to clean up the spill, but if you didn't want to do that, then you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah, because did you get an impression by any chance? Because on the internet, there's also some talk of this being an opportunity for, you know, like martial law or a military state to be put into place. Did you get the feel for that while you were down there at all?
There's definitely National Guard everywhere, and which definitely, you know, that changes the mood in a town. I mean, this town was one that was described to us as, and I'm speaking of Grand Isle, it's a small town, everyone knows each other, you know, everyone says hello, you go walking around and you see your friends walking around too, and then all of a sudden there's Humvees everywhere, and half the people, maybe not that many, but a huge amount of people in camo, you know, there's a lot of National Guard. I don't know about martial law taking over the town, but there's definitely a different vibe, and of course if someone in a Humvee comes up and wants to do something or stop you from coming onto the beach or whatever it is, then the chances are they're going to have some authority.
Yeah.
Or at least be effective.
Okay. Well, that's kind of to be expected, I would think. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I mean, it is being handled on some level by government. I want to say, Jesse, thanks so much for giving, you know, calling in and sharing us your experiences. Where can people find out or help fund your project?
Yeah, so we have a Kickstarter page. The best way to get to that is you go to tinyurl.com/oilspilldocumentary. You could also find us just through Kickstarter, and which is what you were saying before on the air, but that shorter URL is probably the easiest way. So it's tinyurl.com/Kickstarter, and yeah, you can watch the trailer, and people, if they're interested, can contribute a little and help make sure that we can keep spending time down there and keep covering this and come out with a wonderful project that a lot of people can relate to.
Great. Thanks so much, Jesse. Good luck with your project, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks for joining us. Next, we have on a woman. Her name is Barbara Goodfriend. She's an animal communicator who is joining us to share a special message from the sea animals of the Gulf of Mexico. Animal communication is an understanding spoken between species whose hearts and minds are linked through mutual love. It is a thread that weaves interaction in the wild. It brings us deeper levels of compassion and learning in the domesticated world. It is very tangible and beneficial for both the animal and human involved. That's off her website, barbaragoodfriend.com. Welcome, Barbara. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, Hillary. It's great to be on. Thank you.
Well, what is the message that you have for us from the animals from the Gulf?
Oh, I think there are multiple messages here. One of the deepest message that I feel that the animals are bringing to us is really for us to go deeper and feel the connection also to the earth. there's a great amount of loss of life going on with the animals, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, but also at the same time, what's going on is people are really feeling, they're getting within themselves and they're feeling all their emotions. These are triggers for things going on in their lives. And I believe also that unless we straighten out our own emotional baggage and take care of what we need to do, we need to steward ourselves in order to steward the wildlife, in order to steward the planet, and to bring forth the planet and the earth for future generations, to bring the solutions through also. So what happens now is that people are able to talk about this. They're able to go into their emotions and speak about what's going on with the animals, and I believe it's really, really important to get into our own telepathic abilities in order to really get our own guidance, to know how to move forward, find solutions, work through this in the most peaceful way that we can, and come together in a way that everyone can cooperate, that we can really feel the truth. That's the thing. If you go inside, go really deep inside and get in touch with your telepathic abilities, which is the way that the animals communicate, you can really see where the truth lies in all these situations, not only here but globally.
Mm-hmm. I had the honor of being able to swim with the dolphins in Hawaii this past April, and it was the first time I've ever done that. And I have to say that it was one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had in my life because of the way, the feeling. As an empath, it's going to happen, but I think it happens for everyone that experiences that kind of communication and interaction with animals in the wild. If they're able to get close enough and to look in their eyes, you cannot deny that there is consciousness there, that these beings are intelligent, that these animals that we share this planet with have a sense of understanding that we do also through our intuition. And my question for you, and I'm glad you brought this up, was, do the animals know to migrate away from this, or can we help them by telepathically giving them the thoughts and the images of moving away from this area?
Yes, I think it's possible, although some of them, of course, are getting poisoned by the fumes and the toxins and the dispersants, and they can't really maneuver through this, and they're, with the dispersants, they're ingesting this. So some of them, no, they can't get away. But others, yes, I do believe that we can speak to them and ask them to move to safer waters. Yeah, I believe that we can definitely let them know, the extent of the damage, where they could go to. I've been trying to do this with the whales myself, although I feel like a lot of the whales are already, sort of at the bottom of the Gulf. But yes, I believe that we can do that. We can communicate with them. They're very, very responsive. I feel like they're looking for our help. And as groups, they're looking for their own survival. And I think that people could get together, and there's more power in a group, and send those messages out and assist the animals in moving on. I've read accounts of flocks of birds that aren't specific to certain areas that seem to be showing up in different parts of the country now. So, yes, there is a group mind going on, and, yes, we can affect it, we can communicate with them, and we can help them in this way, yes.
It's a nice thought to focus our thought, to direct our thoughts and energy instead of on the disaster aspect and destruction aspect, which we can't not acknowledge. But instead of focusing our energy and sadness and worry, those kinds of energies onto it, we can focus on helping to assist in this way. And I think it's a really positive way of handling the energies that we're all feeling in this country. I have to say, a lot of people feel very helpless with this. They don't know what to do. Yeah. Do they take it to their social networking sites? Do they take it to their local book club? Do they talk about it in the grocery store? They don't know what to do. And so they just kind of watch the little segment on the news, and then they turn it off and they go about their lives, and they figure it's somebody else's problem. Somebody else will fix it. Somebody else will stand up and get angry about it. Somebody else will make a big enough stink, and then, something will happen from there. And it's not going to work this time. I think that we really have to get that message, guys, that it's not going to work this time. You cannot just stick your head in the sand and pretend it away. I mean, I know that this has happened before. I know that there are other cases of having oil leaks that may have been bigger in other places. But how do you sit back and watch the amount of death and destruction happen without wanting to do something? That's what worries me the most, is that people in general have become so complacent and docile in their reactions to things in this world that they're sleepwalking through their life. So they have no connection to their intuition. They believe psychics have a big glowing neon sign in their front yard, and psychic is a dirty word. Right. And they don't have a connection to their psychic telepathic abilities because they don't believe in it.
Yeah, our psychic and telepathic abilities are totally innate in us. And the same thing happened to me when, April 20th, I started feeling everything that was happening with the animals. And then I said to myself, well, what can I do to help them? Instead of sitting here and ripping my own hair out and crying and worrying, what can we do to help them? And our innate abilities, they can create a natural response. Even if you're helping an animal pass, even just comforting the animals, they don't know what to do. They're caught in this oil, but they're catalysts for all of us waking up and seeing, how reckless we've been and how reckless and how material we've been living our lives, and where we can go with this, how we can make little changes in our lives, how, we can so easily feel for the animals, but do we feel for each other? So there are catalysts in this, and this is what's so important, and I feel like this is their message. To get inside ourselves, to come together, to help. So even, praying or helping the animals pass, asking them to move, helping the families, feeling this, but not, like you said, not feeling depressed. And, we can feel our anger. We have a right to feel our anger, but it's about where are we going to take all this? Where are we going to go with this? And this will help us connect with what's really important. Connect with the earth, the heartbeat of the earth, the nourishment of the earth, and everything that can be renewed or lifted or taken care of here. So I feel it's really, really important when people connect with the animals because they reach inside themselves and they can feel this, and this unlocks within them.
Mm-hmm. And they know, anybody who has a pet they love dearly knows that that's what you're talking about. Anyone who has a special connection with any kind of animal understands what you're saying. If somebody who may not believe in psychic abilities or, this is all a bunch of woo-woo stuff, knows that they have a special relationship with their animal, that's undeniable. What I want to ask you, Barbara, is a lot of people have been saying to me, and I mentioned this to Barbara Hanclau when she was on just a few minutes ago, a lot of people have been telling me that their animals, their dogs especially, are getting sick now. Just for no reason. They're just out of the blue, they're just getting sick. And I said to somebody today, actually, I was seeing a client, and I said to her, well, they're taking on a lot of the energy that's happening right now. Look at what's going on. And I think animals have a tendency to physically manifest this quicker than humans do. Is that correct? Is that how it works? What is all that?
Yeah, I do feel they're more connected to the earth, more naturally connected, or, have a quicker response on a lot of times. And I have been seeing a lot of dogs actually almost teetering, trying to decide, having, big health issues come up, but not passing, and sort of, am I staying or am I going? And it's been very confusing for their owners. And, the animals are just they can feel all this. They definitely can, they can definitely feel all of this. And, they're affected, and not only do they take on these energies, but I've found in the last few years that, I would say 5 years ago, the animals really took on our illnesses and all our emotions and all this. But what I've been finding across my work is that what they're doing now is more reflecting things back so that we take responsibility for the things that are going on, not only in our lives, but in the world also. And, all of this, they show us through the heart connection, and that's where, all kinds of healing for the planet has to come from.
Yeah. We need to be rewired back into the heart. Barbara, thanks so much for joining me and sharing your valuable information with us. Thank you. Next joining me is Dr. Ian Prattis. He's a professor in Ottawa, Canada. He will be adding to our discussion and speaking on the topics of the spin factor, consumer culpability, and spiritual guidelines and how they relate to the Gulf. He is a poet and scholar, peace and environmental activist. He is trained with masters in Buddhist, Vedic, and shamanic traditions, and he teaches and talks at seminars and retreats around the world. He is founder of Friends for Peace, a coalition of meditation, peace, and environmental groups that work for peace and planetary care, and also he is the resident teacher of a Buddhist meditation community in Ottawa, Canada. Welcome, Ian. Thanks so much for waiting.
Oh, thank you. No problem.
So, where are you on this whole event? How do you see this? What kind of perspective do you bring?
The perspective I bring is to first acknowledge that this particular crisis has also brought an enormous amount of spin from not just the corporations, where we expect it, but also from government, the media, and the general public. And the underlying aspect I'd like to bring to the fore is that all sectors are culpable. As consumers, if we have a demand for oil and oil-based products, we drive the whole process. So we have an artificial spin to justify our consumption patterns. And this crisis is huge. It's bigger than most people are prepared to take into their minds. But there are other crises like this happening in the Arctic regions, the desert regions, and so on. And we have to go beyond the crisis and look at what is really at stake here. What is at stake is the human mindset, which has to change. There's no short answer better than that one. The mindset has to change. And until it does change, we will go on destroying the ecosystems. My most recent book is called Failsafe, Saving the Earth from Ourselves. And this points out how we can change our mind, that we must stop, examine our patterns of consumption, and then make a commitment to do no further harm, either to the planet or to ourselves. So the solution is an internal one. It doesn't matter what spiritual tradition one prefers, or yoga practice, or meditation practice, we have to come to a steady stop, look at what we do with our patterns of behavior, and change those patterns that cause harm. And this is what I teach, and I've been teaching at the university and to meditation students for over 20 years. And I do see radical changes. At my home, my response has been to give up my car several years ago to do a major eco retrofit on my modest home in the west end of Ottawa, and to be very careful in my consumption habits and to be aware. If I could tell you a small anecdote, I was giving a talk in Orlando, Florida, about environmental issues a year ago. And an answer I gave to a very good question, which the question was, is my mindfulness enough? This is from someone who was very aware and careful about his consumption. And this was a good question. And I said, yes, your mindfulness is enough. But are there enough of us who are mindful? And that's crucial, because I think there's a tipping point that we're not too far away from, where people are changing their patterns. They are changing their minds. But is it enough? I don't have the answer to that. I have certain speculations.
Which are?
That it only takes around 2% of the world's population to meditate on a daily basis to produce a tipping point, a sort of the 100th monkey syndrome, whereby a quality of energy will leap from mind to mind, and we will make different kinds of decisions about what we consume, how we behave, how we interact. Those of us who are wealthy all around the world will learn how to live on less and also live happily on less. It will bring about a different structure of institutions and society, all from taking care of the planet, taking care of ourselves, and also taking this out as action. There's an awful lot of talk through the social networks of, okay, let's make everything love, let's make everything compassion, but where is the action? So the action component of taking the changed mind into the arena of everyday life. This is the challenge that faces us. The challenge of the Gulf oil spill is enormous. It's the most enormous challenge, I think, that the U.S. has faced. And it's not just the U.S. that faces this challenge. It's the entire world.
I think I heard the whole world just exhale. Those who are listening, anyway. What a beautiful thought. And when, it's been one of my bigger frustrations is dealing with the questions that I get from people on a regular basis about the word action. Yes. They have such a difficult time with the word action. Action has to be angry. Why do we need to act? It's all divine will. It's all this. It's all that. It's frustrating. Because on one level, I want to see more people do it, and on another level, you're fighting an entire mindset. Fighting is the wrong word, but you're up against multiple mindsets. People who come from different backgrounds all over the world who have a mindset. Everybody has a mindset. So how, I like how you present, each person has their own role in this. And, I tell people that they're gateways of their own home. They're gatekeepers of their own home. That they make the choice when they go out and they buy something to endorse it or not, to further encourage the production of that or not, regardless of where it comes from. The lack of awareness of what goes into somebody's body, with the food issues that we have. I mean, we could go on and on with examples, but the problem is this lack of awareness, this lack of conscious awareness of what we're consuming. Where do you think we went wrong? Where did it start, Ian?
I think we left consciousness over in one space and didn't recognize that it has to be engaged with society and with the environment in a very practical, down-to-earth manner. 8 years ago, I founded an organization called Friends for Peace, and this has grown into a coalition of over 50 groups in the city of Ottawa. And this is action-oriented in terms of actually saving pristine whitewater rivers and wetlands, actively seeing social justice occur with Aboriginal populations in Canada. So we're very action-oriented. And the former mayor of the city of Ottawa, we have an annual event in City Hall. He said publicly, this is the face of Ottawa he would like to see. I took him to one side and I said, oh, no. This is the face of Ottawa now. It's not future. Because, the future, which is very difficult to wrap our minds around, the future is now. Because the actions we take now set in motion what our future structure and conditions will be like. And the actions we have to take now are selfless. We have to go beyond our wealth, our ego, our desires and our needs, and recognize that if we're going to have a chance as a species to be here by the end of this century, we have to change our ways. And what I get so pumped, I think that is the word, from seeing what happens with the Friends for Peace organization, is that people are changing. The whole diversity of Ottawa comes together, and there's quite a lot of change in our northern city as a result of this.
It certainly brings a quote from Gandhi that it reminds me of this quote, and it says, always aim at complete harmony of thought and word and deed. Always aim at purifying your thoughts and everything will be well. And I think that as we watch the waters become, the opposite of purified, and, we're going to have to go through a purification process, It's the same thing with us, isn't it? It's the same thing with us on another level, a different level. We're going through a purification process of releasing our own vein of muck.
Absolutely. And the muck and the mud is essential, because if you didn't have the mud, you couldn't have a lotus growing. So we need the mud and the muck, but we work through it. And this is work. This is internal work. And there's so many different ways of doing it, all of which are viable. And that's the beauty of what's available to us. But when we do the internal work and we become steady and we become clear, that's when we engage with the environment, with society. Without the engagement, all of this spiritual stuff is useless. The days of the yogis meditating in caves is over. This is the 21st century. And if we want to really build a different kind of society for the remainder of this century, we must change our ways. And I have a chapter in my most recent book which is about stopping, finding the still point, changing the patterns. And it gives very, very precise methods and procedures. And I see this on a weekly basis in terms of the community I teach. I see the transformations taking place in people. And because there's an example set of how to reduce the size of the ecological footprint that we leave and how we engage with society, with other groups, and with the environment, with that example, people will follow suit. So in a sense, all that I'm saying to you, I do my very best to actually walk that talk and put it into action. And I must emphasize the word action, because without action following consciousness change, we're with the same old, and we will be going down the tube.
Indeed. Dr. Ian Prattis, thank you so much for joining me. If people would like more information about your books available, they can go to your website, ianprattis.com. That link is also on the radio homepage and my Facebook event page, and will be posted on my website. Thanks so much for joining this discussion today. I just want to say in closing thoughts, guys, we're not helpless people. We might feel something, we might wish something, we might get angry at something, and it's all to propel you forward to move out into the world to do something. Whether that's following your passion or speaking up on an issue that is dear to your heart or following around as an activist on a cause, whatever that is, if it's maybe you're meant to invent something that contributes to a new world that's going to be rebuilt from this. I think that what we're asking from each other, what we're asking from those that are involved, we need to ask the same questions to ourselves. Where is our responsibility? Where is our, accountability for how we live, how we consume, how we treat each other, and whether or not we come from our heart when it comes to other people. Our relationship that we have with ourselves is dysfunctional, and therefore the relationship we have with other people is dysfunctional. And so it ripples out across like a pebble dropping into a pool of water, and it creates a world from that. And if we want real change, then it has to come from our hearts. We have to heal. It sounds like a cliche, but it's not. It's very real, just like it's real on the oceans, just like it's real for the animals that are experiencing this and the people that are working so hard. My hearts go out to you, everybody that's involved in this, the families, the workers, the children, the people that are there dealing with this on the frontline basis. My prayers go out to you. We are thinking about you. We are hearing you. We are all really ready to step in and do whatever we can to help you. And I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining me. I want to say thank you to my guests who made themselves available on such short notice to join me today to get these special messages out. There is hope. The earth will recover. We will recover. But I can guarantee you things will not be the same, thankfully. Good night, everybody. I'm Hillary Raimo. You're listening to Matters for Mind, Body, and Spirit Talk Radio. Good night.